holding command through wit and hips, her legacy twisted by her successor. No, not her son, who was slain. His murder rose to acclaim. Not her murder, so that's what they say, brought the end of a dynasty. The goddess gave it away.
Love. Welcome to Rebels Agenda, Episode 2. This is a podcast that spotlights bad girls throughout history and brings their stories into the present. I am your co-host, Katrina, here with my co-host, Lindsey, and today's episode is about a baddie that's very well known, Cleopatra. So if you didn't tune in to episode 1, in season 1 of Rebels Agenda, we're using the book Bad Girls Throughout History by Anne Shen to spotlight 8 badass women throughout history. Last week's episode was Lilith. Tune into that one if you want to hear about a deleted scene from the Bible. And as I said, today we're spotlighting Cleopatra. So I'll kick it over to Lindsey to hit us with Cleopatra's quick bio.
Yes, so Cleopatra, a baddie indeed. She was the 7th Cleopatra and the last Pharaoh of Ancient Egypt before it became a Roman province. So she was crowned and took the throne at 18 years old, and she ruled for almost 30 years. And a fun fact is she was actually the first woman sovereign to rule alone for over a decade. So Cleopatra has become legendary for her intellect, for her beauty. Unlike other Greek pharaohs of Egypt at the time, she spoke the local language, so she spoke Egyptian, along with 7 other languages, and she could read hieroglyphics. It is said that many Romans viewed her as an evil whore who wanted to topple the Roman Empire, and we'll certainly get into more of that in this episode. But really, throughout history, Cleopatra has come to represent kind of the prototype of this romantic femme fatale. In other words, a seductive and a beautiful woman who brings disaster to anyone with whom she becomes romantically involved. Now, this was in large part due to 2 infamous lovers that she had, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. They were both Roman generals and politicians. So Cleopatra's life, as legend tells it, came to a dramatic end, and it was eerily similar to that of Romeo and Juliet, which was a double suicide with her husband, Mark Antony. He killed himself with a sword upon hearing a false rumor that she had died, and then she killed herself after his death through a bite of a poisonous snake, and they were buried together. After her death, Egypt fell to Rome and was then ruled by a man named Octavian. This was Julius Caesar's great-nephew, interestingly, and Octavian began converting Egypt, therefore the Roman Empire, and all that was included in it, into a monarchy that we learned about in the history books. So that is a bit about Cleopatra. We always start the episode kind of chatting through this question. So, Katrina, I'd like to kick it over to you. Why do we think that Cleopatra is labeled bad?
I love this question for Cleopatra. She's a badass in obvious respects, things you mentioned like speaking 8 languages, being one of the only pharaohs to still speak Egyptian in a time when the leaders in Egypt were actually from Greek descendant, which she was. She was a descendant of Ptolemy, and Cleopatra was actually Greek. She was politically savvy, was the only female pharaoh to rule for over a decade, yada, yada. But that's why she's a badass. Why is she bad? A lot of it stems from that femme fatale narrative that has been passed down throughout history, right? A lot of the time when you think of Cleopatra, you don't think of her political savvy first. You think of she's a seductress. You know, she was with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony in these dramatic displays to get their affections. And what we found in our research is this Octavian guy who like takes over and, you know, absorbs Egypt after this. We read some things that said a lot of these stories about her as this seductress and this whore were possible just rumors started by him, completely blown out of proportion. So I like to spotlight the fact that she's a badass in some of those lesser known ways we don't always talk about, where the rest might have just been some rumor.
Yeah, 100%. It's hard to know because apparently, as you mentioned, Octavian was the one to recount her death. and therefore he had some like motive if he wanted to take her out. I love that you spotlight her as a true badass. What question comes to mind for me that we've kind of talked through is, did she fail as a leader? In my opinion, when I think about Cleopatra, the first thing that comes to mind, certainly beauty, certainly being a seductress. And then also like the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. And I question, if I was a princess and then became the queen, and then after me, my family no longer ruled, I might call myself a bad leader.
Right.
Which I think is, yeah, just like an interesting and new way to think about the word bad. It's like, not good.
Like, did she suck? Like, and the thing
Yeah.
is, yeah, like, oh, it's the last pharaoh. It's like, wait, if you're the last one, that means you lost the empire, right? And when we take a closer look at that double suicide that you alluded to, it's like, why would a powerful queen who's been ruling for over 30 years and had multiple lovers and was still ruling Egypt on her own, why would she kill herself over this guy and give up Egypt? It's like,
Yeah. There's too much at stake. It's not just a cute love story. I think I saw that her family, like her line, ruled for 275 years. And that was the last dynasty. That wasn't even just like all of Egypt. That's just the last part of who ruled, which was
right.
her line.
I'm going to go with the conspiracy theory that Octavian
I
murdered
like
her.
it.
Like, there is
I
just,
like it.
I just don't think she'd do it. I don't think she'd do it. Either way, in the end, she was the last one. So did she fail? Maybe in some respects. To be continued.
But don't we all, I guess? Yeah.
Right. Right.
I also saw that Octavian killed her son shortly after she died.
Right.
If he went as far to kill her
The
son,
writing's on the
I
wall.
wouldn't put it past him to kill her. It's
Yeah.
writings on the wall,
Yeah.
just like hieroglyphics, which she could read.
Come on. Come on. Yeah, another hotly debated, even more debated topic than did she actually kill herself is, what did Cleopatra look like? And this is kind of a funny one that people obsess over, because it's like, did it really matter what she looked like? We have her portrayed as super whitewashed in the original Cleopatra movie, or I think she's portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor. In the new movie coming out where Gal Gadot is cast as her, and they're like, well, Cleopatra wasn't Middle Eastern, she was Greek. It's like, is talking about what she actually looked like and debating this important? Is this like one of those
Right.
conversations on the red carpet where they're like, who are you wearing? It's like,
Yep.
okay. There's this quote that's been like dredged up by Plutarch, who was a poet at the time. And it says, for her for her beauty, as we are told, was in itself not altogether incomparable. He wrote, nor such as to strike those who saw her, but to converse with her had an irresistible charm, and her presence, combined with the persuasiveness of her discourse and character, had something stimulating about it. There was also a sweetness in tones of her voice. Her tongue, like an instrument of many strings, she could readily turn whatever language she pleased. Basically, what he's saying is she wasn't that hot, but she had a way about her. And
Right.
it's
She had
like,
a way of doing it.
right, which is also something more interesting to delve into if you think about the fact that she might not have been some great beauty and still was able to seduce these powerful men and go down in history as this great seductress. So another reason she's a baddie, her voice being compared to an instrument of many strings, I just think is so cool. And I'm just imagining her as someone who was probably so intimidating to have a conversation with.
She was probably so intimidating when she wanted to be, and so charming when she wanted to be. Like, she
Right.
probably had the ability to turn that on and off, as all great leaders do, men and women. And then for me, it brings to mind the question of, is it a bad thing for women to use some of these tools that we have at our disposal, which is, it can be beauty, certainly, but charm and charisma. Can we use that in a way that influences people? Or is that just straight seduction and like invalid?
It's been demonized. Using those like feminine wiles, maybe, or that charm
Yeah.
has throughout history been demonized as, okay, you're a femme fatale, you're a whore, you're a seductress, you're a succubus, you're Lilith reincarnate,
Yeah.
whatever. And that's not the case. Men do the same thing, and showing a mastery of yourself to be able to turn on different types of charm or irresistible energy depending on who you're speaking to is part of being a good salesperson, part of being a good politician. And I think it's just something that men really fear. And that's why it's been
Yeah.
demonized.
Yeah. I think the most frustrating part of it for me is that at a strip club or a burlesque show, those things are like so celebrated. Whereas, in a different scenario, when you're making a decision about a group of people, those things are so demonized.
What do
Why
you mean?
can't those same, let's say at a burlesque show, I went to one last night, Star Wars
Okay, so
themed,
top of mind.
top of mind. There's a couple women on stage dancing and showing skin and lots of lights and sound, and the whole audience is captivated, pays money for it, applause, infatuated with it, buys swag with them on it. And then you go to somebody like Cleopatra, who is using her beauty to gain power, according to
Yep.
legend, and therefore she is all of these mean things that people say about her. And
This is such a
there's
good
not a
point.
ton of applause
You know what
or
the difference
cash or
is?
like,
Difference is the burlesque show is a contained space, money making. Maybe who knows who owns that club? Is it women owned? Maybe, maybe not.
probably not.
Where you have permission to express yourself that way in an environment that doesn't have to be threatening to the patriarchy, which that word is going to come up at least once per episode. But it's okay in this contained environment. But once you start doing it on your own terms for your own
Yeah.
gain, that's terrifying.
That is a great point.
The other really cool thing I wanted to talk about with her was that she, as the bio that Anne Shen wrote said, successfully portrayed herself as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis. So let's talk about Isis for a second. Isis, in ancient Egypt known as Aset, I hope I'm saying that right, directly translates to Queen of the Throne. And this goddess was also known as the Great Mother, the Protector, the Bringer of Magic. She had a myriad of skills and became one of the most honored goddesses in ancient Egypt, and still to this day is a super famous goddess that everyone knows the name of. So Cleopatra basically decided to dress up as her, portray herself as her for ceremonies, for political events, and people believed that she was the reincarnation of Isis. And this was not a new political strategy. This was something that many pharaohs had done, is to be, well, I'm this one reincarnated and I'm going to show up like this one. But the fact that they believed it and that Isis was such a powerful goddess with so many powers is just really cool to think about.
Yeah, it definitely shows how effective she was in her leadership, honestly, because to align yourself with a god, I wouldn't imagine, like, the person who comes to mind that did that for me is Jesus, and he encapsulated like the father, right? And this is the other side of which is the feminine. And I think to get a whole country behind you and believing that you're capable of accepting that spirit and like leading people through it, yeah, it's really beautiful.
I actually found this thesis written by a student named Clara Wright that she posted online from Bryn Mawr College. And it had a really powerful quote just up in the abstract. It didn't even get to the meat of it, but it says, "The infamy of Cleopatra's legend is rooted in the ancient propaganda of her enemies, who constructed this narrative to suit their own ends. In an effort to sexualize and vilify her, this narrative purposefully leaves out Cleopatra's own agency as the sovereign of one of the most powerful empires in the ancient Mediterranean world," which I think just
Amen. Come on.
really
It's
summarizes
so
like
good.
our whole conversation. And yeah, go Clara. Great thesis. I got to read the rest of it.
I also think it's a huge theme of the women that we're choosing to talk about is, oftentimes there's so much good that comes out of their behavior and their attitudes and their intentions and their actions. And yet the legacy that is left by their enemies is often what's written down in history books because, again, are these rooms owned by men? Are these books written by men? Are these stories passed down by men? Oftentimes, yes.
Especially the written word, 100%. Well, I know Cleopatra is one of your favorite baddies, and you're going to be delving into this a little more deeply in the next few months. Is that right?
Yeah, we're headed to Egypt in late September, my husband and I, and we're very excited. It'll be our last big trip before we try to extend our family. So the
Oh,
close of a chapter of the two of us, and yeah, excited. I am starting to like book hotels and stuff, and the one that we're staying at near the coast is called Cleopatra. So full
that's
circle.
awesome. Definitely get some good inspiration from the great mother herself as you enter that next
100%.
chapter of your life. All right, Lindsey, let's close it out in traditional fashion with your ode to Cleopatra. What is your poem of the week?
Yes, so this one is called Lost Symbols. Holding command through wit and hips, her legacy twisted by her successor. No, not her son, who was slain. His murder rose to acclaim. Not her murder, so that's what they say, brought the end of a dynasty, the goddess gave it away.
Love. That was my first time hearing that, and I'm just, yeah, you're elevating every week. I'm obsessed. I love it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Rebel's Agenda this week, chatting through Cleopatra and the legacy she left us. We are excited to continue this series of spotlighting bad girls throughout history and bringing their stories into the present. On behalf of myself and Katrina, thank you again, and we will see you soon.